All right, welcome everybody to the Jim Acosta Show on this Monday. What can I say? It's great to be back. It was hard to leave all of you over here while I was overseas, but I'm feeling rested and energized, but also jet lagged and in need of a nap. It's kind of a twisted tale, but I think there are some U.S. senators right now that could use a nap up on Capitol Hill this afternoon. The Republican-controlled Senate appears to be hell-bent on taking trillions of dollars of your tax dollars and handing that to the wealthy in this country in the form of extending the Trump tax rates. The GOP plans to pay for all of that by driving up the debt by $3 trillion over the next decade and by cutting critical programs like Medicaid by more than $1 trillion. As you can see, my big guest today to talk about this is Democratic Congressman Ritchie Torres of New York. Congressman, great to see you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thanks so much for doing this. And your staff was telling me that your district has some of the highest enrollment numbers for Medicaid in the country, if not the highest. And so I guess, first of all, how is this going to impact your constituents? Because it sounds like, as I was saying, the Republicans are hell-bent on doing this, and the numbers might move a little bit here and there, but Medicaid is due for a huge cut, just a huge cut here in the coming days.
The Republican reconciliation bill is a catastrophe for the Bronx. So I represent the poorest congressional district in America. 67% of my district is enrolled in Medicaid.
Wow.
So more than 70% of children, more than 80% of nursing home residents, more than 90% of baby deliveries are covered by Medicaid. Just about every hospital in my district is either teetering on the brink or in the red. And so a nearly $1 trillion cut to Medicaid is going to destabilize healthcare providers throughout the country in both urban and rural America. 16 million Americans are projected to lose their health coverage. And Republicans are cutting healthcare by $1 trillion in order to provide tax cuts, not to working people, not to the middle class, but to the top 1%. And keep in mind, the top 1% has 12 times more wealth than the bottom 50%. In fact, wealth inequality is so extreme in America that the top 0.00001%, which consists of 13 families like Elon Musk, have as much wealth as the bottom 50%, which consists of 65 million Americans. And so the so-called big, beautiful bill is going to compound inequality to an extent that we've never seen before.
And, it's interesting that you say all of this. It's very important that you say all of this because, some of the conversation that we've had over the last several months regarding this bill was, oh, goodness, the MAGA supporters, the Trump supporters who don't understand that they're voting against their own self-interest, they're going to see important programs that are probably vital to their communities getting cut, things like hospitals and so on. But you were just saying a few moments ago, it sounds like your hospitals will be in jeopardy in the Bronx and in places like the Bronx all over the country. And I mean, this is very much going to be an attack on people who live in urban areas.
And keep in mind that what is at stake are not only lives, but livelihoods. It is often the case, both in urban and in rural America, that the largest employer is the healthcare provider. Right? In the Bronx, it's Montefiore, which employs tens of thousands of people. Healthcare is 25% of the Bronx economy. It's 20% of the overall American economy. And so a $1 trillion cut to both Medicaid and children's healthcare is going to lead to mass unemployment in both rural and urban America. It represents a betrayal of the very working people that Donald Trump pretended to champion. And Donald Trump is exposing himself as a snake oil salesman. But again, keep in mind that the cut to Medicaid is the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
It's going to add trillions of dollars to the debt, putting America at risk of entering a debt spiral. It's actually going to restrict the supply of electricity in America and raise electricity costs by 7% for American families, by 10% for American businesses, with increases as high as 30% in the hardest hit states. And keep in mind, in 2024, 90% of new electricity generation in America was clean energy.
Right.
Solar was 60% in and of itself. Donald Trump is going to defund the leading sources of new electricity in America, and he's restricting the supply of electricity at a time when we want to be the leaders in the AI revolution, which requires massive amounts of energy.
Yeah, there's no question about it, and it also seems as though, I mean, he's just throwing in the I mean, not that he cared about climate change to begin with, but the country is gonna be throwing in the towel to some extent in the battle against climate change for years now. All sorts of credits for electric vehicle purchases are gonna be wiped out. I do wonder, there are a lot of Republicans who drive electric cars. I mean, Elon Musk, I think he's only sells his cars to Republicans now. I mean, those tax credits are gonna get wiped out, and it was in the triple digits in DC and all over parts of the country this past week. The country is baking. What happens to climate change?
But actually, here's the cruel irony.
Yeah.
The districts that are going to be the hardest hit are not the Democratic districts. So the Republican reconciliation bill is going to endanger about 800 planned clean energy projects that would generate enough power for 27 million homes. 75% of those projects are in Republican districts. So Republicans are sabotaging their own congressional districts, are sabotaging job creation and investment and electricity generation in their own states, in their own congressional districts.
Yeah. And I mean, speaking of Elon Musk, I mean, not to ask about the thing of the day, but I will just ask. I mean, he did put out a tweet earlier saying it's obvious that the insane spending of this bill, which increases the debt ceiling by record $5 trillion, that we live in a one-party country, the Porky Pig Party, he calls it. Time for a new political party that actually cares about the people. I sometimes think of Elon Musk as like Eliza Doolittle, My Fair Lady. He's just sort of learning how to speak the King's English for the first time. He doesn't understand how Washington works. I mean, the Republicans, by and large, as a party, they have been driving up the national debt on their own, by trillions of dollars over the last couple of decades. If you take out, I suppose, what happened during the Biden administration with COVID. I mean, it's Bill Clinton who balanced the budget. I mean, does Elon Musk not understand this? I mean, what was your response? Maybe you haven't seen that, but if I'm reading it to you now and you're hearing it, what's your response to that?
Well, I mean, when I think of Elon Musk, I'm reminded even a broken clock is right twice a day, but he has no one to blame for himself. Like he's
Yeah.
been complicit in empowering the Republican Party. But, the greatest fiction in American politics is that Republicans are fiscally conservative. Most of our debt is the product of Republican policies, Republican wars, Republican recessions, Republicans' tax cuts for the top 1%. Democrats have been much more fiscally responsible. All our legacy pieces of legislation, whether it's the Affordable Care Act or the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act, all of those were fully paid for.
Right.
The Trump tax cuts in 2017 added $1.5 to $2 trillion to the debt. And these tax cuts could add $3 to $5 trillion to the debt at a time when the debt has never been larger and more expensive. People don't realize, but interest payments on the debt have become the largest line item in the federal budget, second only to Social Security. America spends more on debt than we do on Medicaid or Medicare or social or military defense. And the reason is the Republican Party.
Yeah, that's so true. And the other thing that I feel like does not get enough coverage in all of this is, I mean, apparently tucked into this bill is $80 billion for more ICE raids and detention facilities in this country. I mean, if people have been just overwhelmed with shock and grief and watching these images of mothers and grandmothers, abuelas, people getting the cinder blocks thrown into their cars and people getting ripped out of cars, to be detained by ICE, they're going after cooks and house cleaners and landscapers. They told us they were going after criminals, that they're going after landscapers. How do you see all of this playing out? Because it just sounds like this is going to be a huge investment in more cruelty.
Look, I see Donald Trump as an aspiring dictator. Like his role models are Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. And he's intent on creating a reign of terror that's going to drive immigrants into the shadows. His mass deportation industrial complex is wreaking havoc on American families, on American communities, even on the American economy. And his deportation machine has been so cruel that even he has had to apologize. He had to issue an apology, a mea culpa, to farmers and to the hospitality industry and to restaurants for conducting raids and arrests that have destabilized those industries. But we are a nation built on immigrants. Like immigrants make invaluable contributions to the American economy. Every major economy, including ours, has a demographic crisis, but we have a solution. It's immigration. And there are whole sectors of the U.S. economy, whether it's healthcare, home care, construction, agriculture that would collapse without the invaluable contributions of immigrants. And so an attack on immigrants is an attack on who we are as a country.
Yeah, and I mean, just I think it's tomorrow he's going to be paying a visit to this alligator Alcatraz, this monstrosity they want to build down in Florida. I guess Ron DeSantis is looking to be relevant again, and he's going to give Trump an Alcatraz that is, I guess, allegedly surrounded by alligators. I mean, it sounds medieval, and I guess that's the point. They want to get medieval on migrants in this country. What do you think about that? I mean, to me, I guess this is par for the course with what Donald Trump wants to do to this country.
I would call Donald Trump a sociopath, but that might be an insult to sociopathy. He
Yeah.
seems like a much worse figure. But he's reminding us that medieval cruelty is not a bug, but a feature of Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Cruelty is the point. I mean, why else would you deport people to a maximum security prison in El Salvador where they will likely be tortured? It's
Yeah.
all about cruelty.
Yeah. And the other thing that has been happening in New York, I'm sure you've been commenting on this. I'll get your comment on it. The mayoral election, Zoran Mamdani looks like he's on the path to becoming the next mayor of New York City, unless something extraordinary happens that gets in his way. There are some pretty racist comments made about him from people like Tommy Tuberville, and even the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been saying that New York City is going to be turned into Caracas and that sort of. What are your thoughts on all of this? I mean, I know Mamdani has made some controversial statements, and people in the Democratic Party are absorbing that, trying to figure out, okay, what do we do about this? But at the same time, the way he has been just sort of, treated in this sort of racist way, just awful racist way, it's just downright un-American. It seems to me. He won a race. This is what the people of New York voted for. We'll see how he does. But for Republican leaders like a senator and a Treasury Secretary to use that kind of language, to me, it's just completely out of bounds.
Well, there was a member of Congress who sent a letter to the Attorney General calling for his deportation.
Yeah.
I mean, he's the Democratic nominee. He won the election. And whether you agree with his politics or not, every member of the Democratic Party has an obligation to speak out forcefully and with moral clarity against Islamophobia. We have to send a powerful message that we are a Big Ten party. We are a multiracial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious democracy. We're all a welcome. We are the party for Jews and Christians and Muslims and people of every color and every creed. And we have to speak out forcefully against all forms of hate, including Islamophobia. But the attacks on him shows that how far we have to travel before we reach a country that treats everyone equal.
And forgive me for asking this because I saw this. I was away last week. I was on vacation. I'm looking at my phone. I'm thinking to myself, I don't really know Zoran Mamdani that well. I wonder do the elected officials in New York City know him that well? Do you know him that well, Congressman? What can you tell us about him? He's very young. I think he's younger than you. And so I guess
Makes
we'll
me look
see.
old. Yeah.
Yeah. What's that?
Yeah, look, I don't know him well. I've had
Yeah.
one conversation with him, but I feel like there's much to learn from his campaign. I mean, he ran on affordability, and I feel like Democrats would do well to run on affordability.
Yeah.
It was the first election where a majority of the electorate was young. Voters ages 18 to 44 made up about 50% of the electorate in New York City, which is unprecedented. It was the highest turnout since 1989. And he managed to mobilize 50,000 volunteers and turn out 200,000 new voters. And so whether you agree with his politics or not, and I have my disagreements with him, you have to admire the magnitude of the movement that he has built, and we have to learn from it. And
Yeah.
look, there's a generation of young people who feel the affordability crisis is the central issue, who are struggling to cope with the crushing cost of housing and higher education and healthcare, who feel the political establishment has failed them catastrophically. And he's offering them an alternative. He's speaking to their legitimate grievances. And so I feel like we can learn from that.
Yeah, and I know I'm sure you could because you've been a very strong defender of Israel. That might be an area where you might have some disagreements with Mamdani, but on Israel, on Iran, this is something that a lot of folks are wondering. Okay, what did happen with these strikes on Iran? Do you have any sense as to because the Trump and Caroline Levitt and Pete Hegseth, they made it sound like the entire nuclear program's been taken out. Obviously, that doesn't seem to be the case when you look at what some of the reporting has been on the intelligence assessments and so on. Do you have any sense of where things are right now? I know the administration's been pretty cloaked in secrecy in terms of what was accomplished. What do you know?
We don't have. So here's what I do know.
Yeah.
Donald Trump's initial statement, surprise, surprise, was a lie. The notion that it was totally and completely obliterated is a lie. It is probably the case that the United States delayed but did not permanently derail the nuclear weapons program, but the extent to which it was delayed, no one knows for sure. And one thing that's troubling is the whereabouts of the 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, which is pretty close to weapons grade enriched uranium. No one knows where that is. And so that's the huge question mark that emerges from all of this.
Yeah, and I mean, as a congressman from New York, I mean, I remember 9/11. You're obviously a lot younger than me, but one of the things that was always a concern in the 2000s after 9/11 was loose nukes. And that is one of the, I suppose, byproducts of this is you could have a situation where we might have loose nukes. We just don't know. I mean, that was one of the reasons why you wanted to have a diplomatic sort of program in place to sort of rein in the Iranians. I understand why the Israelis are frustrated with the Iranians. Everybody's frustrated with the Iranians, but now we have to deal with that prospect too as well.
You make an important point. So
Yeah.
everything we know about the program is based on the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. We need them to have visibility into Iran's nuclear program, because if we lose visibility, then we're going to have much less knowledge of how rapidly Iran might be progressing toward a nuclear weapon. And so diplomacy has to be part of the equation. There's no escaping it.
And finally, Congressman, because of your very stout support for Israel, just wondering where you are in terms of where you think the Israelis should be right now in terms of dealings with Gaza, getting that region on the path to peace. I know you have lots of conversations with your friends over there, and it's obviously a very important constituency in your district. What are your thoughts on that whole situation? Because folks are looking at their TV screens and they're saying, my goodness, how much longer is this going to go on? What do you think?
I think we need to secure the release of the hostages. We need to end the war, which has brought untold suffering to both Israelis and Palestinians. And we need to find a framework for Israeli-Palestinian peace. That's ultimately, peace is the only way forward.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Congressman, I guess we're all going to watch. And you said you're coming up tomorrow. Your expectations for this so-called big, beautiful bill, I've been calling it the big boulder of bullshit. But, that's just me having fun over here on Substack. But, I mean, it doesn't sound like there's really much that can be done to stop this from happening. It seems like the numbers are there. Freedom Caucus is not going to stand in the way. People like Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins in the Senate, they've expressed their concerns. This is happening.
It's all hollow. I mean, these people are morally bankrupt. The Republican Party is not a normal political party. It's become a cult of personality around Donald Trump. Donald Trump is their Lord and Savior. He has an iron grip on them. I mean, I saw a number of Republicans author a letter opposing the Medicaid cuts that they voted for.
Right.
Like, these people are not serious. Like, they will publicly say, oh, yeah, we oppose the defunding of clean energy tax credits and we oppose the cuts to Medicaid, but then ultimately vote for it when it matters. So they're frauds.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations and interviews I've done with Republican members of Congress where people like Tim Burchett, maybe I should have one, but, they talk a good game about not wanting to run up the national debt, and this is just going to explode it. And I do worry about that for future generations, and I think that how are we going to pay this down? I have no idea.
We are in a debt spiral, and we are approaching World War II levels of debt accumulation, not during wartime but during peacetime.
Yeah.
And I worry we're going to enter a debt spiral in which we're going to pay more and more for less and less. And it's largely because of Republican policies.
Yeah. All right. Well, Congressman, really appreciate the time. Thanks for doing this. Good to see you, sir. And safe travels to D.C. And, hopefully your staff eats lots of pizza over the next 48 hours or whatever it's going to be.
Pray
thanks
for us.
The time. Yeah. Thanks for the time. Thanks, Congressman. Appreciate it. All right. That was Congressman Ritchie Torres of the Bronx. And I want to go straight to Glenn Kirschcner, because Glenn and I think the last time he and I spoke was at the town hall we did in D.C. about a month ago, and I really am interested in talking to Glenn because, I mean, again, a lot of this, forgive me, because, a lot of what I'm doing over the course of this show and probably some other shows is getting caught up on the news. There's Glenn right there. Glenn Kirschcner, how are you, man?
I'm good, Jim. How are you?
Good to see you. I was just saying, I missed a lot of news last week when I was off. I felt like I needed to take that time. I was running on fumes. Don't want to get, too much into a me type of thing. But the birthright citizenship case sort of hit the, you know, news world like a meteor, basically last Friday. And in Fridays in DC and for a lot of people across the country, they just say, you know what, I just need to pour tall one and turn the TV off and get the hell away from my phone because, it just gets nutty. But, this was a fairly, I saw some of your comments and saying, okay, don't worry, it doesn't sound like birthright citizenship is going away in this country. But it does seem to me this notion the Supreme Court has really limited nationwide injunctions in this country. And that to me is kind of an undercovered, I know there was some freak out Friday night into the weekend, but your sense of the magnitude of this, because to me, we've been living in a country with nationwide injunctions for some time now. And now we just rip the rug right under that. Is that what we've done?
Yeah, in part we have, Jim, and
Yeah.
I am of two minds with
Yeah.
respect to the birthright citizenship case that was just handed down by the Supreme Court. Maybe one of the burdens of being a lawyer is like, I can see both sides of the argument here. This is not an all or nothing proposition, but let me not bury the lead because I agree with you. It feels wrong. It feels like it cuts against American principles to say, okay, if you're a litigant, you can afford to hire a lawyer. You can go in and seek to have your constitutional rights vindicated, not only your constitutional rights in the birthright citizenship arena, but if you're a pregnant woman who has been living here for decades, but you are undocumented, maybe you're otherwise a law-abiding citizen, working, paying taxes and all of that, and you're about to deliver a child, you are asserting the rights of that unborn child, soon to be
Yeah.
born child. If you have the money and you can get in court and you can get yourself an injunction to prevent against your and your soon to be child's constitutional rights, great, good for you, bully for you. But guess what? If you're not, maybe you can't afford a lawyer, maybe you can't become part of a class action, then even though the constitutional principle is solid, birthright citizenship, well, sorry, everybody else is out of luck. It almost, Jim, not to get into an analogy, feels like a poll tax, right? It feels like, well, if you don't have the money to hire a lawyer and get into court and vindicate your rights or become part of a class action,
Right.
you're shit out of luck. I don't like that. However, now let me go to the other side of the point. What the opinion basically says, and it's a fractured opinion. I mean,
Yeah.
there are so many different opinions authored, multiple concurrences by Alito and Thomas, multiple dissents by Sotomayor, Ketanji Brown Jackson. So there's a lot to unpack, and of course, the majority opinion was authored by Amy Coney Barrett. But in essence, when you parse through it all, they say, listen, all we're saying is this is more appropriate for class action lawsuits. And you know what happened immediately after that opinion was handed down? Amended complaints were filed to expand the nature of the litigation to be class action
Right. I mean, yeah.
lawsuits. So I do think it is a problem we'll be able to remedy. It remains a problem because it feels like it cuts against what we stand here. Little thing called equal justice for all, which is the layman's way of saying equal protection of the laws as guaranteed by the Constitution. So I
Yeah.
don't like it, but I didn't have a hair on fire. Well, I never have a hair on fire moment, to be honest. But I didn't have a hair on fire moment because organizations like Democracy Defenders, right? Norm Eisen's group, the ACLU, the NAACP Defense Fund, they are already filing lawsuits to accommodate what the Supreme Court has now said. These things have to be handled as class action lawsuits. So I do think we'll be able to move through this. And importantly, none of the opinions said the guarantee of birthright citizenship should be revoked or Donald Trump can write it out of the Constitution with a Sharpie. That's
Yeah.
not what this case was about. This was only about the process by which these kind of suits should be brought.
Yeah, it doesn't sound as though he's going to succeed, that he's going to be ultimately victorious on this issue of, revoking birthright citizenship in this country. But there is, and we could parse it out and have that conversation. But to me, this idea that you can't have nationwide injunctions anymore, that injunctions are going to be basically regional or apply to only certain parts of the country. I mean, if you're seeking an injunction in a case that has national implications, basically, you might have just certain parts of the country covered by what is, decided to be, the grounds for an injunction in that particular case.
Yeah.
Whereas it might be the right thing to have a nationwide injunction in some of the. What's your sense of that?
I agree with you
Yeah.
because, it doesn't seem like if a judge concludes that a preliminary injunction should be granted because what Donald Trump has done in a given executive order is, quote, blatantly unconstitutional, which is exactly what the federal judge John Coffenauer, who was appointed by Ronald Reagan, of all
Yeah.
people and of all presidents,
Right.
he
Right.
said
Right.
it's
Right.
blatantly unconstitutional. And he
Yeah.
asked the question rhetorically, where were the lawyers in the room when Donald Trump was signing it? Well, unfortunately, the lawyers were right there. And I think they all know precisely what they're doing. They're doing things that are blatantly unconstitutional to try to bubble them up to the Supreme Court and get the court to rewrite the Constitution as it did in the presidential immunity case. That is the goal here, right? There's no secret about what they're doing. But once a judge rules, no, this is
Yeah.
unconstitutional. Well, guess what? Unconstitutional for one person or one of our 13 federal jurisdictions, unconstitutional for all.
Right.
That is that's only right by the standards that we like to apply, equal protection of the laws. But here's what I think it's going to inspire, Jim. Once you have one suit filed, you're probably going to have similar suits filed in all 13 federal jurisdictions. So if we have to play this game,
It may be.
we'll play it by new rules, and we'll still get the equivalent of a nationwide injunction if we have to do it 13 times.
But you'll have to do it through class action cases filed in all of these different, appellate districts. But when Sonia Sotomayor, and to me, she has been downright heroic in the way she has, grabbed the bull by the horns among these 9 justices and stated things very plainly. I mean, she said, "No right is safe in this country right now if the Trump administration can get away with this." I mean, your thoughts on the way she has responded to this. I mean, to me, if she is saying something along the lines of "no right is safe," and she's even talking about Second Amendment rights, people who care about those kinds of rights. If somebody is seeking relief from a federal judge because they feel like their civil rights are being violated, it sounds what Sonia Sotomayor is saying is that there are all kinds of rights that could be in jeopardy here.
I couldn't agree with her more. No right is safe if our Supreme Court, at least the 6-justice majority, refuses to abide by both the express terms of the Constitution and the spirit of the Constitution. But what I have seen, Jim, over and over again, is the federal judiciary, and that includes both the trial court judges who see these cases in the first instance and the federal circuit courts of appeal who see them in the second instance if an appeal is filed. They are holding strong by and large. They are a firewall against Trump's rampant lawlessness and unconstitutionality, which is what he's churning out every day in the Oval Office, seeing how much he can get away with, how much people will basically give him their lunch money rather than fighting the bully, because then maybe he doesn't even have to go into court and defend some of this illegality and unconstitutionality if the people who are hurt by these executive orders aren't willing to fight in court. But here's the thing, Jim, behind that firewall that is being built, and it is being built high and thick and wide and strong, the Supreme Court seems to be tearing down the back of that firewall that's being built by their own lower court judges. So I think that is what Justice Sotomayor is referring to when she says no right is safe. It's not because the trial court judges, and it's not because the federal circuit courts of appeal. It's because of that 6-justice majority.
Well, and I'm very concerned about, what the Supreme Court has been doing, sort of acting as, uh, as sort of a MAGA Supreme Court, it
Yeah.
seems to me. Ever since Trump has come onto the scene, it's just unreal the way they gave him the immunity decision while he was running for reelection, and since he's been in office, they've sort of helped him expand the powers of the presidency. And it just, I do wonder what a legal expert like yourself thinks about all of this, because it just sounds as though, the concern that I have is, do you have a Supreme Court that is essentially becoming yet another political body in this country? And I know a lot of people are concerned about that. And if enough Democrats come to that conclusion, won't they say at some point, okay, well, you might as well expand the number of justices on the Supreme Court, or you might as well have term limits on justices at the Supreme Court. If they're going to act like political animals, they should be term limited too.
They should be. Yeah, I think we are long overdue to expand the number of justices for a whole host of reasons, not just because it seems like there is a block of justices on the Supreme Court who are rewriting the Constitution on a whim. When Yale constitutional law professor Akil Reed Amar said in the presidential immunity case, the Supreme Court ruled that the Constitution is unconstitutional. I mean, that is dramatic. And, I will take his assessment to the bank every day of the week. I feel like I tried to find an analogy that helps describe how I feel, because I'm a rule of law guy. And I
Yeah.
was for 30 years as a Fed, first an Army prosecutor doing court martial cases, then a federal prosecutor for decades doing murder and RICO cases. And I kind of feel like if I were a medical doctor, if I were a surgeon, I would have to stand outside the operating room doors and watching doctors flood into the operating room to intentionally kill patients, and I would be helpless to stop it. That is how I feel, the rule of law is being handled by, this six justice radical right wing block up on the Supreme Court. And so going back to increasing the number of justices. First of all, nine is not a magic number. People seem to
Yeah.
think it's got to be nine. In our nation's history, we've had as few as five, we've had as many as 10. And
Yeah.
nine is not a magic number. Moreover, our population has increased in the United States. The caseloads that federal
Right.
court judges and justices are handling have increased. So what have we done? We've increased the number of trial court judges. We've increased the number of federal circuit court of appeals judges, but somehow we can't raise the number of Supreme Court justices even to norm for the population and the increased caseloads. We have 13 federal jurisdictions, and one justice is supposed to have supervisory authority over one
Yeah.
jurisdiction, but we don't have enough. So some of them have to double up. For every conceivable reason, we should be looking to raise the number of Supreme Court justices, in my opinion.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, I think that is not an unreasonable thing to want to go about pursuing. I mean, especially when you look at what has taken place over the last couple of presidential terms. I mean, the way Mitch McConnell sort of paved the way for Trump to get 3 Supreme Court justices. He may get another 1, 2, who knows, maybe 3 during this term in office. I mean, I sort of think that any of the 3 liberal justices will want to leave the scene. But you just don't know what might happen in life. To me, it seems that it's only natural that he's going to get more appointments to this court. And if you end up with a Supreme Court majority, 7-2, kind of a 7-2 MAGA majority on the Supreme Court. I mean, there are a lot of rights, constitutional protections in this country that are just going to go away.
Yeah. I can see them going after marriage equality. I can see them, anything that displeases them ideologically, or I will add religiously, I
Yeah.
think it's at risk. I think first and foremost, those are some of the rights that are at risk. And frankly, it's generally the people who need the protection most, because they are
Yeah.
often the relatively speaking, the voiceless, the powerless. They have no influence in high places. They're put upon in a lot of ways by our society. And I think that is now true in what we're seeing in the deportation arena. And these are the folks who are going to suffer most. And frankly, a lot of them are going to end up being red state folks. So, there's so many reasons, Jim, to do it right and to remain
Yeah.
loyal to the Constitution. And yet the MAGA bloc seems intent to do it their way based on their motivations.
And the last thing I wanted to get into, because you and I haven't spoken in a while, is we're seeing Trump in this big, beautiful bill, as they call it. I call it the big boulder of bullshit. They want to have another $80 billion for ICE roundups and raids and all of these atrocious things that they've been doing. I think what we're about to see unfold in this country, if that money is approved and put out to DHS, is just going to be ungodly. But I'm wondering how much of this you see as being legal and in being constitutional in this country right now when they're talking about building an alligator Alcatraz in Florida. I mean, the purpose appears to be to drive home the idea that if you were an undocumented immigrant in this country, that you're going to be subjected to government-sanctioned cruelty.
Yeah.
Government permissible cruelty is going to be what happens to you without due process. And there's just not a whole lot you can do about it. And I suppose folks might say, "Oh, well, that's throwing around some hyperbole there." But when they're putting out social media posts over at the White House that shows alligators outside of a cartoon looking prison, and they want an alligator Alcatraz. So they want basically confinement that might run up to the edge of cruel and unusual punishment in this country. Can this be challenged on constitutional grounds, Glenn? I mean, what are your thoughts on this and how these ICE raids have been conducted? Because it seems to me that this isn't pushing the envelope. This is blowing up there is no envelope. It's tearing up the envelope.
Yeah, the fear and the intimidation is the point. I would say the cruelty is the point. I don't know where the kindness, where the empathy, where the decency for our fellow human beings is in all this. But let me say first and foremost, deportation is an important law enforcement tool of the United States. If we have somebody who comes here illegally, commits all kinds of crimes against the population, violent crimes, drug crimes, sex offenses, you name it, and they enjoy all their rights under the Constitution, they are convicted, they're sentenced to prison. The next thing that ordinarily happens, I know because I was involved in this as a former prosecutor, they would be deported at the end of their prison term. Deportation is an important law enforcement tool of the United States, but that's not what they're doing. They are chasing down undocumented immigrants. Now, I don't consider them criminals. They may have violated a law when they came here, but we know many of them were asylum seekers. Many of them had status that Donald Trump is now trying to revoke. And there's lots of arguments that he shouldn't be able to revoke status and denaturalize people. That's a whole nother conversation.
They're trying to talk about that too. Exactly.
Popped up today. But let's talk about the practicality for a minute, and then let's talk about the legality. Jim, the practicality is if you look at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, ITEP, they put out a comprehensive study of how much money undocumented immigrants pay into the government coffers. The last reported year was for 2022. And most undocumented immigrants are law abiding. They're working, they're paying taxes, they're raising their families, they're doing everything right. They just don't happen to have documentation. And ITEP said they are contributing, get this, $96 billion to the government coffers when they're paying taxes and when they're having Social Security withheld, Medicaid withheld, unemployment withheld from their paychecks. And guess what? That's free money to the United States government because they're not entitled to any of the benefits that they're paying in on the front end. And so not only is it economic suicide, politically speaking, to do what we are doing to undocumented immigrants, but we also need them to keep our economy up and running. I mean, there's no two ways about it. Plus, look at how much money it takes to don masks and run through produce fields and garment districts and Home Depot parking lots, getting people who are doing everything right in life except they're not documented. That's the practical and the financial. It's insane because to the United States, it's lose, lose, lose. On the legal, listen, if somebody is properly subject to arrest and they're undocumented and they are taken to immigration court and they have all of their constitutional rights of due process notice and opportunity to be heard. And what that means, those are like buzzwords and people may not know concretely what that means. Notice means before this government does something against you, including deporting you, you have to be given advance notice and enough time to
Right.
acquire a lawyer, get into court, and then what? Part two, your opportunity to be heard and make your case as to why you should not be deported. And if the system works the way the system was designed to work and a judge orders that person deported, then they should be deported, not to a third country where they're going to be persecuted, tortured, and killed, but they should be deported. That's the way it's supposed to work. But what we know, Jim, is this administration doesn't give a rat's ass for anything I just described. They don't care about the practical and the financial. They don't care about the legal and constitutional. All they care about is looking strong, playing to their base so Donald Trump can remain in power, right? Feeding red meat to MAGA and instilling fear and intimidation in hopes that people will self-deport or won't come here in the first place. That's not what America is about.
No, it absolutely is not. And denying people due process, for kicks, because you're trying to make a political point. I mean, that's just un-American. It's unconstitutional. It's un-American, and you just can't do it. And I just wonder, are the courts going to get in is the Supreme Court ultimately going to say to him? Because I think that's that is the whole ball game here.
Yeah.
Is if and when this makes its way up to the Supreme Court, some of these unconstitutional methods that they've used, what does the Supreme Court do then? Because, if due process is a squishy, undefined thing ultimately down the road, under this administration, then I think all bets are off as to what could transpire after that. But
Jim, and I think we both know it's a fool's errand to predict what this Supreme Court might do, but let me be foolish for just 30 seconds. Yeah. First of all, on the due process front, we've had 4 due process cases in the last month or two, and one was 9-0 unanimous in favor of due process. The second one was 7-2 in favor of due process. The third was 7-2 in favor of due process. The fourth was that outlier and kind of horrific opinion that we're not so worried if the Trump administration is deporting people to third country removals where they may be at risk of torture, persecution, or murder, but we're not so concerned about that. So listen, we're batting 750 there on the due process front. So that at least gives me some hope that they will continue to honor the constitutional guarantee of due process for all persons. It doesn't say all citizens. And then I don't think they're going to sanction or endorse Donald Trump taking his Sharpie and crossing out the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship. When push comes to shove and we're up there on the merits, not just a preliminary injunction or a nationwide injunction, I don't see them doing it, but goodness knows the Supreme Court has proved me wrong before.
No, that's true. And yours truly as well. All right, Glenn, great to see you, man. Thank you so much for doing it. I like the way you bring the optimism and the glass is half full from time to time, because I am of that mindset too. I don't think it's curtains for us all. And, you have to have hope. You have to have faith in your fellow Americans. You have to have faith in these institutions. My God, if they've kept us in good stead up until this point. You have to have some faith that they're going to keep that doing, moving forward. But Glenn, great to see you. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Great to be with you.
All right. Good to be with you as well. That's Glenn Kirschcner. Let me bring in Michael Cohen. It's been a little while since Michael and I have spoken. Lots going on. I see, folks are there in the comments asking about where we are in terms of the big, beautiful bill. I hate calling it that because it's just ridiculous. And then you see, hang on, I'm having some trouble here. Hang on, folks. Hang on. Doggone it. Let me try that one more time. You see some outlets just try to call it the GOP mega bill and things like that. It it's such a mess. Trying to come up with, what to call this stuff. I like big boulder of bullshit. That's me. There's Michael Cohen. Michael, great to see you, man.
Jim, it's good to see you. Welcome back stateside. I was away too. I was in Europe. I was in France.
Oh, good for you. Great. Yeah. You know what? I'm a little jet lagged. I'll be real honest. And
I don't get jet lag.
What's that?
I don't get jet lag.
Oh, good for you. Good for you. I Probably should have had a Diet Coke before coming on today, but that's, folks are just going to have to cut me a pass here. But no, it's
Yeah.
good to see you.
Jim,
And
I'll tell you, it's great to see you as well.
yeah,
Michael Mondays. There's so much for us to actually get into. I watched the show, obviously, and I was
yeah,
listening to my good friend Glenn Kirschcner there. And I
yeah,
have to tell you, here's the mistake that we are making as
yeah,
Democrats. So it's a massive mistake. I wrote about it in my Substack the other day. The mistake that we're making is we have to acknowledge that Trump, despite the craziness that's coming out of that administration, they are actually winning. And we
yeah,
need to really give ourselves like one of those old V8 commercials. I wish I had a V8 where you slap yourself in the head and you
yeah,
ask yourself why. It's not just why. What are our politicians, our Democrats doing wrong? Because at the end of the day, it's their way. It's not even a let's meet in the middle, the old Tip O'Neill days. You remember those days, the old Newt
sure,
Gingrich days,
yeah,
right? Where you can have a disagreement. Listen, Jim, you and I don't agree on 100% of things. We're not
yeah,
supposed to. We have different backgrounds. We live in different states, yada, yada. All right. We're supposed to be different. But
yeah,
you and I can sit down on any given day and we can have a fair, a rational, and a respectful conversation where
yeah.
at
No,
the end
there's
of the day, I don't get everything I want. You don't get everything that you want. That
yeah,
to me is a good result for a negotiation. But that's not what our members of Congress are doing. And even
yeah.
when you see somebody like, what do you call it? Don Bacon or you
Yeah,
see, what's his name?
Tom
Tillis.
Tillis and Don Bacon. I mean, two of these sort of moderates who are left in the Republican Party up on Capitol Hill announcing that they're not going to run for reelection. I mean, to me, I was traveling back yesterday and I saw the announcement from Tom Tillis and I thought, well, of course. I mean, he's sort of like the Bob Corker of this new administration. Bob Corker, the senator from Tennessee, who also was chased out of the Republican Party, chased out of Congress by Trump and MAGA. They're doing it now to Tom Tillis. They're doing it to Don Bacon.
But
You have some,
and I'm sorry,
you,
Jim, can I?
and it just this is just how it's going to go until the party stands up to him. This is how it's going to go.
But is it really Donald that's chasing them out, or do you think it's cowardice? They don't want to deal with the primaries. They don't want to deal with the bullying. They don't want to deal with all of the negatives that are going.
Well, I'll tell you what it is, and I don't want to have anybody make the mistake of saying, okay, I believe this is what Tom Tillis is up to, or I think this is what Don Bacon is up to. I will say that one of the proud traditions here in Washington is members of Congress announcing that they won't run for reelection to preserve their ability to go be a lobbyist on K Street in D.C. They don't want to lose a primary. They don't want to lose an election. They think it steals some of their juice if they're going to go make some money on K Street. There is that. I'm just saying
Jim,
that is there. That is Washington.
Why I enjoy doing this with you on Michael Mondays. You're really fucking smart. You know that? Because you just laid it out as good as
Yeah.
anybody has done. They don't want to ruin their opportunities for future.
Yeah.
For their future pocket. And you know what? I call that cowardice. Because let me tell you something, what the Democrats should be doing now. They should be going ahead and they should be speaking to all of the moderate Republicans and say, listen, this does not work for the American people. The big, beautiful bill, Medicaid, I don't care how many times Caroline Leavitt says it's going to add $4 trillion to, to Medicaid down the road. And so it's all nonsense. It's all lip service. It's not true. But we did not elect these individuals to ultimately become lobbyists and consultants and board members and so on. We elected them to lead. And if they're only willing to lead when it is conducive for them, well, that's a problem for the rest of us. And I take offense to it.
I do too, and that is why, one of my favorite books is and it's over my head, is John F. Kennedy's Profiles in Courage. He wrote a whole book about lawmakers and politicians and leaders in American society over the years, putting their own self-preservation on the line, putting their own political careers on the line. We just don't see that happening in Washington as much anymore. And what it reminds me of is when John McCain gave that infamous thumbs down to the Republican efforts to kill Obamacare during the first Trump administration. that was somebody acting in a pretty goddamn heroic way. People can say, "Oh, I don't like John McCain for this or that." He saved Obamacare almost basically single-handedly when it was about to be torn down during the first Trump administration, and he just didn't give a rat's ass anymore. And I just wish we had more of that. I mean, we had John Fetterman saying today, "Gosh, I'm missing my family beach vacation right now because I'm stuck here in Washington." Who the fuck cares?
Not
Honestly.
me. By the way, not me. You know what I care more about? I care more about the fact that he walks in with a fucking hoodie into the people's house. That I care about. But the fact that he's doing his job, I mean, give me a break.
And it's not that far to the beach. You can get from DC, you can get to Ocean City in 3 hours. What's happening here?
He makes it seem like, he's missing his flights and so on. By the way, even if he did, isn't our democratic republic worth more than that? And if it's not to you, get the fuck out.
Yeah.
Leave. It's gotten to a point right now, this win-win, lose-lose scenario.
Yeah.
Republicans and Democrats have to get together. And we cannot, and we should not. And it's one of the things I respect most about you, because you tell it the way it is.
Yeah.
We cannot for a second let our, just let our guard down when it comes to this administration. They are winning.
And what do you think about to me, when apparently Trump's going to go down to Florida, I unless this has changed, but I believe he's supposed to go down to Florida to do he wants to go see this alligator Alcatraz. And, at some point, isn't this just a tired old shtick?
No.
He goes down to the border and he does the whole, he looks around, and then maybe they'll put his name or his face on a pillar of the border wall. Now he's going to go down to alligator Alcatraz. I mean, what is this monstrosity? It's insane.
It's very interesting as a concept, because it is complete and total brutality to individuals that this administration, and I'm going to be clear about something, because I know Trump better than anybody. He doesn't care about Alcatraz Alley. He doesn't care about it. It's all Project 2025. You need to scapegoat someone. And in this specific case, it's the non-documented migrants. It's the illegals, as they call them. And so they come up with what has to be, in everybody's mind,
but what is this
ridiculous
sick shit?
name.
It is such sick bullshit. They're not arresting criminals anymore. I mean, I guess they are a little bit here and there. They're arresting grandmothers, working in hair salons, and they're busting restaurant staffs at your favorite restaurant around the corner. They're scooping up landscapers at Home Depot. They're going to put them in alligator Alcatraz.
Yes.
What a bunch of bullshit.
And if you listen to Caroline Levitt describe alligator Alcatraz, it is in a remote section of literally the marshes of Florida,
the Everglades.
The Everglades. The only way out is one road, which is infested with alligators, hence the name Alligator Alcatraz. So it's even more impenetrable if you think about it, because if you are, say, 50 miles away from a main road and you have to actually try to go through marshes and stuff, and it is infested with alligators, there's probably less than a 0.00001% chance that you will survive.
Right.
That's the point. It is to instill as much fear into the hearts of individuals so that they don't come to this country. And you know what bothers me the most about it, Jim? What bothers me the most is the number of people that turn around and say they shouldn't be here anyway. All right. Yeah. And they shouldn't be crossing our borders without authorization and permission. Yeah. And you know what? They have some, I don't know. It's not. It's not.
Yeah,
wrong.
But I have the Statue of Liberty over my shoulder. People have been coming here for decades. People have been coming here for over a century, on boats, on ships, across rivers, on planes. A lot of the people who come into this country come in on planes and then overstay their visa and they just stay. There's sort of a cartoonish misunderstanding of how immigrants come into this country and they just stay. And by and large, what people are responding to is they see 6 or 7 guys in a Home Depot parking lot and they say, you know what? I don't like that. I wish I didn't see that in my neighborhood or my community. But those guys might get picked up in the back of a pickup truck by a white citizen of this country who just wants cheap day labor while he's, redoing the tile in his bathroom, or he's trying to, clear a lot that he bought somewhere.
It's all about the cruelty, Jim. That's all that it's about. It's to show strength. Do not cross into the American border. Or
I'm just saying, for the people who complain about these workers, they need to ask themselves, the folks over on Long Island and some of these places where you got these big tough guys, the big tough MAGA guys from New Jersey and Long Island. I don't like those guys on the corner at the Home Depot and all this stuff. Ask yourself, are your teenage kids going to go cut the grass when it's 100 degrees outside? Are they going to go work in some sweaty kitchen when it's 95 degrees outside and wash lettuce? No.
The answer to that is no.
The answer to that question is fuck no. They're not going to do that. And so I don't understand this, I'm on the end of my boss stool and I don't like the immigrants at the 7-Eleven. Who the fuck do you think is working at the 7-Eleven?
Yeah, look, you're not wrong, Jim, when you said that this is something that has taken place in America for a long time. I know you came to this country legally. My dad came, after World War II as a displaced person to this country, but couldn't even stay here. Went to Canada. Ultimately, came back to America to teach head and neck reconstructive surgery. My wife comes from the Ukraine. Came to this country, legally. There is a path. The problem is that because Congress is so divided, the divisiveness between the two parties is so great, they can't even sit down at a table and try to come up with an immigration plan.
They had an immigration plan, and Trump deep-sixed it. He 86'd it, to use a term. They had a bill when Biden was president, and he quashed it.
He did, but they can't even sit down now. Even bring back. I forget the senator's name who put that out there, who was a Republican, by the way.
James Langford.
Langford, right? So Langford's bill. Let's bring it back and call it the Trump immigration. They have kicked this can down the road for more than 5 decades when it comes to immigration. We need a policy that makes sense. We need a policy that gives individuals,
I agree,
the opportunity to come to this country where they don't have to live in the shadows. They don't have to live off the grid, where they can't have a bank account, they can't own property, and so on, that they have to live in on a cash basis when we technically live in a cashless society. We need to do things like that. But the divisiveness between the two parties is so huge. It's bigger than the Grand fucking Canyon, where, Jim, it's unfair. It's unfair to America because, look, Glenn was correct when he said it's like they produce billions of dollars of income and revenue for the coffers of this country. And now you're going to cut them off. It's not just cutting them off. Jim, you know how angry you're going to be when your blueberries cost $25 for a little tiny bushel?
They're already pretty expensive.
You're going to be when
the last time I got them, they were like $7 or $8, and I'm like, this for goddamn blueberries. What's happening here?
What's going to happen when it's 20? Because you don't have the cheap labor, and Trump understands this. He truly understands it.
Well, he's used cheap labor at his own properties. I mean, that's been reported. That's been documented. He's used undocumented immigrants at his own properties over the years. He has. So I don't know. I haven't seen any ICE raids at Mar-a-Lago or.
By the way, have you heard about this new app that has caused a lot of consternation?
I saw that.
To the White House right now, and they're freaking out about it. I wouldn't be shocked if Trump and Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and others file some sort of an obstruction of justice charge.
They'll go after him for sure.
Against the makers of the app. The app, just to those of you who are watching, it's a great audience, by the way.
Yeah.
The app is an app that basically tells you where ICE agents are currently operating. So therefore, if you live in that area, it's almost like a neighborhood watch type of an app. So instead of it being, hey, there's a guy who's robbing people on 44th Street, instead it'll say that there are ICE agents in the area. So it basically becomes a warning.
Well, Michael,
I'm
you and I are
sure
old
they'll
enough.
bring an obstruction case.
You and I are old enough to remember when we had neighborhood watches and what was it, the Guardian Angels in New York, and people would call and they'd say, there's some guys with some ski masks down on the street corner. You need to go check this out. Now the guys in the ski masks on the corner are the ICE agents. I mean, so I can understand why people are a little freaked out right now when they see this going on in this country.
The bigger danger with all of that, again, this is a country that is unfortunately gun heavy. I mean, there's so many firearms. What happens when these guys end up breaking into a house to arrest people, or somebody happens
I agree
to
with
be,
you.
and I don't want to see that happen, and I'm nervous that that's going to
Me
happen.
too.
Because you know what that's going to do, Jim? It's going to amp up ICE, within which to be even more cruel to individuals and to
whatever
be
happened
more
to Joe.
aggressive.
Yeah, whatever happened to Joe Friday Dragnet? Show up at the door with the badge. Let me just introduce myself, ma'am. I'm Joe Friday. Joe Friday's in a mask now.
Jim, you're dating both of us, and I don't like it.
Dun, 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 dun.
Right.
All right. Hey, Michael, good to see you, man. I'm so jet lagged. If I keep talking, I know I've probably said too much already, but you're a bad influence on me. But thanks, Michael, for doing it.
So, by the way, to anybody that's a Michael Cohen supporter, please, one of the things that in finality, that I say all the time, and I truly mean it. One of the things that I appreciate so much coming on with Jim on the Michael Monday and others is we're building a community.
Yeah.
The only way things are going to change is to be a part of the community. Be active, be loud, be angry. All right?
Yeah.
Be angry, and don't be afraid to express your anger. If you're a supporter of Michael Cohen, you don't support Jim Acosta and you don't subscribe to his show, shame on you, or vice versa. If you're a Jim Acosta supporter, come check out my posts. We are building a community.
We're cross-pollinating.
That 2026 goes the right way. Because right now, I'm telling you, and I can read the tea leaves better than anybody, I'm afraid. I'm afraid 2026 doesn't go the way that we think.
Yeah, I'm afraid too, Michael. I'm afraid. Actually, what I'm afraid of is I do really believe that the people are going to rise up in this country, and it is going to shock people the way that people are going to rise up in this country next year. And the thing that concerns me is what Trump is going to try to do to stop that, what Trump and Stephen Miller have up their sleeves to try to stop that. That's what concerns me. But Michael, great points as always. Great to see you, my man. Thanks so much.
Great to see you, my friend. Go get some rest.
All right, I appreciate it. All right. I don't know what Michael's doing to not have jet lag, but I am feeling very, very jet lagged. Everybody, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I did plan on speaking out a little bit on what the so-called press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has been saying in the briefing rooms. One of the other things that I was absorbing while I was off and trying not to look at my phone was just the nonstop BS emanating from her during these press briefings. And as an experience, I think of myself as pretty experienced senior White House or chief White House correspondent, is the press secretary usually does not lie that much. And I mean, you're talking to somebody who covered Sean Spicer and Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Caroline Leavitt just seems to go out there with bullshit talking points and just lie all day long. And I did want to say, please go read my Substack that I put out late last night. If you haven't had a chance to read it, check it out. It sort of crystallizes my thoughts a little bit better than me just pontificating here in an extemporaneous way. But one of the points that I made is, and I think that the Trump press secretaries lose sight of this, more than anybody. The briefing room is named after James Brady, the press secretary for Ronald Reagan, who took a bullet for Ronald Reagan. James Brady, Republican. He would just be ashamed of what he sees right now coming from Caroline Leavitt in the White House briefing room. Those briefings should not be propaganda sessions. They should not be Fox News talking point sessions. They should not be, rehearsals and performances, to land some kind of job on Fox someday. This is not, MAGA's Got Talent. That's not what Caroline Leavitt should be doing, auditioning for MAGA's Got Talent. You're supposed to be providing information to the American people, accurate, reliable information to the American people. And I mean, I was trying not to look at my phone. I was trying not to absorb information. The way that she was going after my former colleague, Natasha Bertrand, was absolutely shameful, outrageous. But anyway, I wrote about it, and I was much more eloquent about this, articulate about this, in my Substack that I wrote last night. So I will point you to that and not go any further. In the meantime, I do want to thank Congressman Ritchie Torres for joining me today, the great Glenn Kirschcner, who is bringing the fire today, and of course, Michael Cohen for this recurring edition of Michael Monday. It's great to see him back. I think I got a little bit more overheated than he did, which is not always the case. So anyway, but I'm blaming the jet lag for anybody who has any concerns about what I had to say. I am jet lagged, and I'm not responsible for everything that I just said. All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate it. Still reporting from Washington. I'm Jim Acosta. Have a good evening. Good night.